Beseder. So we are continuing once again in Mishkanot Sha'anim, unit number 4. We went through all the details, and now I want to give an overview of what have we done, how does this whole system work, what do you need to look at, right? So L'chora, the Torah says you have to keep Shmita. So presumably that would mean you have to keep Shmita. That would be the right, De'oraita, because the Torah says it. So that should be the starting point. And then you say, okay, but maybe why would Shmita not be De'oraita? There are two reasons why Shmita would not be De'oraita nowadays. The first reason has to do with Kedusha Rishona, Kedusha Shniya, meaning is there Kedusha Eretz Yisrael nowadays at all, right? Is Kedusha De'oraita, not De'oraita? At least, is there Bichlal Kedusha Eretz Yisrael nowadays, now that after the second exile? That's the first question. Rashi seems to say that yes, nowadays after the second exile, there's no kedusha. That's the one, and the Rambam says that there is kedusha. It seems that anyone who would even require the second element of is Yovel, is Shmita contingent on Yovel, would require first of all to have kedusha, and then you can talk about whether there's another contingency. So, where there's another element that's required in order to make it De'oraita. So that's the first point about, those are the two things we have to look at. When it comes to Shmita and Yovel, so we had a machloket, three-way machloket in the Tanaim. What depends on what? Lemaise, Rebbe didn't look at the Psukim in Behar and said, well, you see that 7 times 7, 49, all that whole game, right? 7 times 7, and the next year would be the 50th. He doesn't go through all of that. He goes somewhere else. He says, sorry, not that, the other one. The V'zedvar Shmita Shemot, that Shmita and Shmitat Ksafim and Yovel are contingent on each other, and therefore the Rambam says, just for example, the Rambam says that there is Kedushat Haaretz. Then he says that Shmitat Ksafim is contingent on Yovel. Is also Shmitat Karka not so clear, right? Machlokes between Rav Yosef Kara and Rav Yosef Kara, right? Whether the Rambam meant to include Shmitat Karka or not. So that's beseder. Now, Lemaise, when the Gemara brings this whole idea of Rebbe lahalacha, it's brought in Abaye's. Abaye says in two places in the Gemara. One is Gitin in the context of Prosbul, and the other is in Moed Katan in the context of watering plants. Abaye cites Rebbe and says that Shmita nowadays is Drabanan because of Shmita Shemot. So in Gitin, it's in context, right? Because Shmitat Ksafim is contingent on on Yovel. In Moed Katan, it's a bigger chidush, and it's an expansion of that chidush. The Beit HaLevi says that Abaye was expanding Rebbe to include another thing. And that's how Rabbeinu Tam says Lemaise. Rabbeinu Tam says Lemaise that really the Gzera Shava starts from Shmitat Ksafim and Yovel, but then it's extended beyond that to also include Shmitat Karka during Shmita, and therefore they're all Drabanan together. That's the Rabbeinu Tam. Rashi seems to hold like Rebbe and not like Abaye. Therefore, Rashi says, why Shmita nowadays Drabanan? Not really because of Abaye. Really because there's no Kedushat Haaretz. That's what Rashi seems to say. I'm not going to go into all intricacies in Beit HaLevi, but that's what Rashi seems to say about that. Now, the problem is that in both places, Rava says another answer. And the question is Rava disagreeing with Abaye or completing what he's saying. So the Tosfot with Rabbeinu Tam, we already said, so Balat Tosafot, who say that Shmita is Drabanan, like Abaye said, they say, so too, so Rava is not disagreeing with Abaye. We hold like Abaye, and Rava is agreeing with Abaye. He's just saying, he gives another answer, gives another element, whatever the element required there, he adds there. But it seems that some Rishonim, at least Itur says, that we hold like Rava against Abaye, against Rebbe, and Shmita is not contingent on Yovel at all. So Shmita is De'oraita, because why not? So far we have at least three opinions, right? We have the Itur who says De'oraita. We have Rashi says it's Drabanan because there's no Kedushat Haaretz. What does Rashi say about Shmitat Ksafim? Not clear, right? All right. Rabbeinu Tam who says it's Rabbeinu Tam says Drabanan, and Rav and the Rambam we said depends on whether he agrees about Shmitat Karka being Drabanan or not. So that's 3.5 opinions, I'd say, so far. There's another opinion that says that nowadays it's only Midat Chasidut. That's the Ravid and the Baal HaMaor. I keep on calling it the Itur, I don't know why, but the Ravid and Baal HaMaor. The Ravid and Baal HaMaor both hold that's only Midat Chasidut. Now the Ramban and Rav Kook, they all say that's a bit wild. It's a bit wild because in the whole Shas they're always discussing about Drabanan. They never mention that actually it's only these frummy Chazal who decided to keep Shemitah for themselves, but they never obligated anyone else, which is what they seem to assume, right? So that's a bit wild. It's a bit wild. So again, I keep on giving a bit of a recap, so that because I'm saying many different opinions all the time, I want us to always remember what we're up to, right? So we have is it 5 different opinions at this point? We have those who say you don't have to keep Shemitah at all nowadays, right? Midat Chasidut, that's all. We have those who say it's the Shmita De'oraita, the Itur, right? The Itur and Baal HaMaor are actually on opposite ends of this. Just saying. We have what we consider generally the mainstream opinion, the Rabbeinu Tam opinion, says Drabanan, because of the Hekesh Shmita Le'Yovel. The Rambam might hold that. He might say there's a distinction between Shmitat Ksafim and Shmitat Karka. Rashi, not so clear what I'll hold the halacha. Because on the one hand, Rashi says Abai expanded Rabbi beyond what Rabbi intended, but there's no Kedushat Haaretz. So does Shemitah apply at all according to Rashi? Not clear. Maybe it's only Drabanan for that reason. What about Shmitat Ksafim and Karka, that Hekesh? It's not clear if Rashi holds like Rava or not. So Rashi might be the opposite Shita, is what I'm saying. Rashi could hold on tight. Shmitat Ksafim does apply nowadays, De'oraita. Because we don't hold like Rebbe. Shmitat Karka does not apply De'oraita because they're not Kedusha for a totally different reason. So Rashi could be very like the opposite of the Rambam in that sense. Now, let's take a momentary break and talk about why is there no Yovel nowadays? Why is there no Yovel nowadays? Because the Gemara says there's no Yovel nowadays because the Gemara in Gittin, Yerushalmi and Bavli, both. The Gemara, both in both places, says because you need the Shvatim sitting where they're back in their original places to keep Yovel, because Yovel doesn't really mean much if the Shvatim aren't where they originally were. Because the main point of Yovel is to return to your original land after you've sold it, you've gone, you've invested and you've lost and whatever. You go back to that baseline where everyone has their land that Hashem allotted them and their tribe.
Didn't go down from one place to the other afterwards?
Done. Good question. I have to think about it. Because, they did create a new tribe, right? We said the Chazon Ish says to return the Yovel, you need someone with Ruach HaKodesh. It's not enough to take over the whole land and all of Am Yisrael coming. That still won't help. Why? Because you still need someone with Ruach HaKodesh to say that this is the old or the new, whatever. There needs to be some kind of chalukah. Now, this raises the question of, okay, how many? So Rabbeinu Tam had, if we're talking about wild opinions, Rabbeinu Tam had a wild opinion, and he said that in Beit Sheni there was a representation of every shevet back in their original land. So how many of each shevet do you need? Nothing at all. Rabbeinu Tam read the Gemara like this. Rabbeinu Tam read the Gemara as follows: you need to have kol shvatim, right? They say, wait. What if they're Mulbavim? No, they have to be in their land. Says Rabbeinu Tam, once you say they have to be in their land, you no longer need all of them. Because the main point, right? What is the main point? The main point that they're all here is the main point that they're all in their land. So Rabbeinu Tam, no. The point is the Yovel concept where people return to their land has to work. And that means by tribe. So if you have a dozen people of each tribe, so it's enough to have 150 people in the country and you have Yovel again. Right? 150 people in the country, and you have Yovel again. Yes, that would also be a balagan indeed, but it would be enough. It would suffice to have 150 people in the country. I mean, even fewer. I'm just saying, it would be sustainable. not sustainable, frankly, but right. You only have to have representation in every Shevet. You don't necessarily need to have anyone. You don't need to have the majority of people here. And his proof is that that's what happened in Ezra's time, and that's what happened in Yirmiyahu's time. And now this will raise a question. Wait, hold on, slow down. So you're saying that in Beit Sheni they actually kept Shmita De'oraita? We're going to be talking about Hillel, right? Says Nachinami. What's the answer? Hillel planned the future. Hillel was aware that Hillel knew that Mikdash world that there will be another exile, and therefore he had to create a prosbul. Ramban says, "You're crazy. You don't do such things. We don't do such things." As he says to Rabbeinu Tam, he says, "Lo yachol that that he says, well, I know that the Mikdash world, I know there'll be the Mikdash world. There'll be another exile. What are you talking about? Fine."
It's funny, Rabbeinu Tam is mostly going down to earth, no, in his steps.
Yeah, it is interesting because here he is very wild in that sense, right? Interesting. I wonder if do we have more writing about Rabbeinu Tam about Malchut Israel and how we get back and all that. I wonder if it's there's some kind of connection there, because the Ramban sounds very much like you have to have some kind of something very big has to happen to have representation, significant representation for. He has to have most of Am Yisrael here with representation of every Shevet. That's the Ramban's opinion, right? As opposed to Rabbeinu Tam, who says, no, some kind of representation. So, if I mentioned Ezra, this will add the last element. Ezra, what else did Ezra do about the Shemitah? How do we know Ezra kept Shemitah? How do you know that Ezra HaSofer kept Shemitah? Ezra HaSofer, yeah, Ezra. It says in the book of Ezra, they swore they will keep Shemitah. The question is, why did they swear to keep Shemitah? According to Rabbeinu Tam, it's easy. They swore to keep Shemitah because there was a chiyuv to keep Shemitah, and they swore to do it. All right, so life is easy. According to the Ramban, why did they swear to keep Shemitah? They obliged themselves. And this gives us a very, very big headache. Says Beit HaLevi. So anything the Gemara says, anything the Gemara says that we've downplayed, right? Whether that later on Chazal decided, you know what, we don't want to do this. We want to be able to water our plants during Shemitah, the Gid, right? So we're not going to oblige ourselves to that extent. All the things that are explicit in the Gemara, fine. Whatever is not explicit, we have to assume is more than Drabana, meaning we are all mechuyav b'shvuah to keep Shemitah, according to Beit HaLevi. Now, it is true that some elements will be Drabanan, but not all. Rav Kook says a whole bunch of points over here. I'll just tell you where it is. Rav Kook makes a whole bunch of points against this Beit HaLevi. Rav Kook, over here, page 10. Makes 5 different points about Beit HaLevi, but basically 2 elements. Number one is the Shvuah is not a new swearing to keep some mitzvah that we invented. It's to keep the Shvuah they were keeping. Meaning, and then either, according to Rabbeinu Tam, they're keeping Shvuah. According to Ramban, they're keeping Shmita De'oraita. So they swore to keep the Shmita Midrabanan, but it's still a Drabanan Shmita. It's not De'oraita. It's not, it's either they swore to keep the De'oraita din or they swore to keep the Drabanan din, but they weren't swearing to just keep their own Shvuah. So that's the one element. The other element is just all around Shas. All around Shas, we don't see that. We don't see the Gemara ever alludes to this kind of distinction. It needs to come up somewhere. If the Gemara in Bavli and Yerushalmi, they both say Drabanan, Shmita, Drabanan, never mention that there's also another element. No Rishon thought, the Gemara didn't realize this. None of the Rishon realized this. Only Beit HaLevi realized this. There's something missing, right? We've never heard that also it's a Shvuah, so you have to be Machmir b'Sfekot, right? Nafkamina would be Lachmir b'Sfekot, right? You have to go to Chumrah whenever there's a Safek. Why? Because if it's Drabanan, you could make it a Sfekot. Right, you have to Machmir b'Sfekot. Shvuah is a din Drabanan, right? If a person swears about what he will or won't eat, right? Not a halacha, just he swears off of not eating tofu. No. Once he's angry and he says, "It's a shvuah to never, not me. It's a shvuah to never eat tofu." Okay, what about soy? Is that tofu? Lo yodea, right? You have a suffix. So you should machmir, right? It's Shmita De'oraita, right? Same too here. You swore to keep Shmita, so you have a safek. You have to machmir because the Shvuah is De'oraita, and because Shmita is De'oraita, right? That's how Beit Halevi approaches it. The Rav Kook, as I said, disagrees. So let's quickly recap again. What are all the opinions we said? All right, let's try to do this. Beit Halevi says that Shmita nowadays is a Shvuah. Some dinim are drabanan, where Chazal said that no longer Shvuah, only drabanan, but otherwise a Shvuah. That's Beit Halevi based on some of the Rishon. So based on the Ramban, based on those who disagree with Rabbeinu Tam about Yovim nowadays. So about Shemitah in Ezra's time, right? That's Beit Halevi. Then we have the Itur who says Shemitah is De'oraita. So we disagree with Rebbe, we disagree with Abaye, except Rava. Shmita is De'oraita. So we're done. Then we have Rabbeinu Tam, Ramban, the mainstream opinion, possibly also Rambam, who says Shemitah is contingent on Yovel, both Shmitat Karka and Shmitat Ksafim. Or to the Rambam, it might be Shmitat Karka, Shmitat Ksafim, and not Shmitat Karka. Meaning Shmitat Karka would be De'oraita. That would be the Kesef Mishnah's opinion as opposed to the Beit Yosef's opinion. Right? So who do we hold by there? We said Chloket, right, which is more authoritative when it comes to explaining the Rambam, right? The Kesef Mishnah is explaining the Rambam. The Beit Yosef is more halacha, so is more halacha lemaaseh. So that's double-edged sword, right? Two reasons to go with the two opposite opinions. Then we have Rashi, who seems to say Shmitat Karka doesn't apply because there's no Kedushat Haaretz. That's it. Now, what about Shmitat Ksafim? It could very well may be that Rashi says we hold like the Itur. And Shmitat Ksafim would be De'oraita, Shmitat Karka would be Drabanan. Right, according to Rashi. Who did I mention? Ravid and Balamor. They say that it's all Midat Chasidut. Everything in the Gemara, wherever it says Drabanan, they mean Chazal decided to do it for themselves, but it's not really a thing, not really a chiyuv. That's the and Rav Kook says about that. That's a bit wild. It's a bit wild because the Gemara never alludes to that either. It always assumes all of Shas is full of you keep Shemitah, you don't keep Shemitah. It's never if you want to keep Shemitah, right? Which is basically their opinion. That never comes up. That option never comes up in the Shas. And it's strange the Gemara would never allude to such a thing, right? In other words, the Gemara in Sanhedrin Kafvav tells a story about Rish Lakish. He's hanging out with a few of his guys, and he sees a guy pruning his vines. He says, Kohen v'zamal, right? Kohanim traditionally don't take mitzvot lod barat seriously because they figure they're above that, right? Because they get the trumot, so they're kind of above all that. That's why they have a better reputation when it comes to mitzvot lod barat. He's Kohen, that's why he's doing this, right? No, they should have said as well. He just doesn't hold that you have to keep Shemitah, so right? Could have just said that, right? They don't say that. They say something else. We'll see in Unit 6. But so just for example, where it's one thing to say that in the halachot, but we're going to try to define this as carefully as possible. But Rish Lakish never occurs to him to say, well, he just didn't want to keep Shemitah. So, Shulchan Aruch says Shmitat Ksafim is Drabanan. Doesn't say there's no Shulchan Aruch on Shmitat Karka, so there isn't. So that doesn't help us. What he said about Shmitat Karka. On Klur he'd follow what he says in Beit Yosef. He says Drabanan as well. Chazon Ish says that's obviously so, and will change only when you have something Ruach HaKodesh who could divide up us Eretz Yisrael once again. The Rama cites, and this is very, very important because it'll be useful in Sfekot. The Rama cites the Ravid and Balamor, who say that Shemitah is only Midat Chasidut. Now he does say, the Rama does say, it seems that's the minhag. But he doesn't seem very, very happy about it. Rav Kook, as we said, kind of holds on to all ends of this stick. On the one hand, he says, it's Eretz Yisrael. We came back to Eretz Yisrael. Take it seriously. So the right thing to do is to assume Shmita is De'oraita, even though Pashtus of the sugya is Drabanan. And if people want to make him more than what I write, you really can't reprimand them. You really can't say anything because there are those, as the Rama said, really are those who say that Shemitah does not apply at all. It's only Midat Chasidut nowadays.